My name is Ria, and I'll be hosting the session today. I work as an associate with Veditum India Foundation, and I'm joined today by Sid, Ashani, who you just saw, and Madhapa, who are my colleagues at Veditum. Just to introduce Veditam and our work a little bit before we get started. So Veditam is transforming the environmental governance landscape of India. And we're doing this by empowering communities to take action and by creating empathetic environmental leaders for the future. Our work is interdisciplinary and is situated at the intersection of environmental as well as social justice. Our journey as an organization really started with our founder, Siddharth, who walked along the river Ganga. And this experience of walking over 3,000 kilometers along the Ganga inspired him to start the first of our flagship projects, which is called the Moving Upstream Project. And since its inception, Sid and fellows from the Moving Upstream project have walked along, experienced, and documented 6 Indian rivers, which is journeys of over 6,000 kilometers. And over these long but slow and thoughtful walks, one of the major things that we noticed was a major threat to India's rivers, and that was the issue of sand mining. Um, Sand is sort of all around us. We use it to build our houses, roads, infrastructure. Our cities are really made out of sand. We also use it to make glass, ceramics, semiconductors, and a lot more. As one of the most important raw materials in construction, the demand for sand is actually quite massive, particularly so in a country like India, which continues to see large-scale infrastructure development and the expansion of cities, and where a lot of construction is still heavily dependent on concrete and hence sand. Which begs the question, where is all this sand coming from? So sand mining is the process of extracting sand, and we primarily mine sand from our rivers. In fact, shockingly enough, after water, sand is the second most extracted natural resource on Earth. It is also the most extracted mineral on the planet. But river sand is really so much more than just a raw material for real estate. Sand is created over just mind-boggling geological time scales, and it really shapes and has shaped the riverine landscape over millennia. So we'll be hearing from Nachiket shortly about how sediment continues to really shape rivers even today, and also shape the lives that are able to exist along these rivers. The scale of sand mining is a little like it's quite hard to capture, often operating in remote areas and involving fairly powerful networks. The impacts of mining, though, are quite visible. Sand mining impacts sand-dependent species, which lose habitat. We also see flash floods and bank erosion that threatens communities that live alongside rivers, and public infrastructure is frequently damaged by sand mining. Not to mention that the sector is just rife with some fairly horrific violence. And it's sort of in response to this and this understanding that we built that the India Sandwatch project came about. So India Sandwatch is an environmental accountability project by Vedatam. And our goal is really to protect India's rivers from unsustainable and destructive sand mining. We're trying to mainstream conversations around sediment and to reimagine the governance of our rivers in a way that gives sand the importance that it really deserves as a critical part of rivers. At the heart of this project is an open data platform, which we built in partnership with Uloy Labs. I think Ashani can maybe put the link to the India Sandwatch platform in the chat. But a little bit about India Sandwatch, the platform. We are enabling collection, annotation, and archiving of data related to sand mining in India via the platform. The project really enables informed media reporting, research, policy making, and collective action. We're also using this understanding to further develop frameworks and building collaborations and capacity for people to take action. Um, since our work is so deeply involved with looking at sand and sediment, and like I mentioned earlier, we really do want to mainstream conversations about sediment and its role in rivers. We wanted to open a dialogue with people from various disciplines to understand this extremely diverse and important role of sand in the environment and in our lives. Are just asking questions like, where does sand come from? Where does it go? What role does sediment play in different ecosystems? What are the governance mechanisms that regulate sand mining? Do we have any alternatives? What role do scientists and civil society play? So yeah, join us for a series of conversations as we navigate the journey of sediments from creation to extraction, exploring these interconnections with geology, ecology, hydrology, journalism, and so much more. So now that we know a little bit about Sediment Stories, I'm very excited to introduce our speaker for today. So today we're joined by Dr. Nachiket Kelkar. Nachiket heads the Riverine Ecosystems and Livelihoods program at the Wildlife Conservation Trust, which is one of the partners of India Sandwatch. And Nachiket has actually been studying Ganges River dolphins, riverine capture fisheries, and social and hydro-climatic changes in the Gangetic Plains since 2007. And will be talking to us today about the geological, animal, human histories and futures of the Gangetic Plains. So yeah, welcome to Nachiket and to all of you.
Thanks.
Uh,
Thanks, Ria. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. So, Naji, maybe just to start us off, you can tell us a little bit about your work and the ecosystem and species that you work in. Maybe a little bit about how you got into this work.
Yeah. So, first of all, I again want to formally express my gratitude and thanks to Veditum India Foundation and India Sandwatch for this opportunity today. And just to come into answering your question, so I work on Ganges River dolphins, but not just that, also on other species that live in the Gangetic Plains, in the rivers and wetlands of the Gangetic Plains. And the other entity that they share space with is fishing communities in on these rivers. So that is a very integral part of what we try to do. Working with people as well as working in ways that attempt to integrate human livelihoods and their security with larger changes that the Gangetic Plains and that environment are witnessing, along with what is needed for while we secure or take efforts to secure human livelihoods dependent on rivers in a non-consumptive way. What lies, or what is the scope for sustaining the conservation of endangered riverine species? Of course, the Ganges dolphin is one of our focal species. There are other species like the ghadial, the smooth-coated otter, several species of turtles, and that is what we broadly do. And in the context of sediment stories, all these species, one way or another, owe their existence to the presence of river sediment as much as they do to the water that flows. So the Ganges river dolphin, for instance, and its sibling species, which is the Indus river dolphin, as people may know, they are both species of blind dolphins, the only two extant species of blind dolphins which are so for millions of years because of the volumes of sediment that these rivers carry, which makes the water very murky. And that's hardly an impediment. Not having clear eyesight is not an impediment, but rather there has been the evolution of a simple but highly efficient echolocation apparatus in these dolphins, which enable them to navigate through these turbid waters. And the fact that the species has been so resilient to centuries of human use and abuse of these river ecosystems is in itself, in some sense, because of certain efficiencies in the way they navigate and live, part of which happened due to evolution gradually in response to a lot of sediment-rich water as their habitat. So, yeah, so that is regarding other species. I could actually, with your permission, share some photographs,
Yeah,
which kind of
please.
bring up the role of sediment in this system and how species depend on it. Sorry. Yeah, so this is for people who may not have seen this species up close. This is a young Ganges River dolphin. You can see the small pinhole camera-like eye. At best, it has the ability to distinguish the lit surface of the river from the dark bottom, just about. But otherwise, the retina and the lens of the eye have regressed quite significantly over these millions of years of evolution. This is a nice picture of the Indus dolphin from a captive pair that was kept in a tank in Switzerland in 1970s by Professor Pilleri. And if you look at the dolphin on the bottom, you can see it touch the tank floor with its flipper, which is, it's like a visually impaired person feeling for cues to navigate. So, that is that really shows how these species might be also navigating underwater in their wild habitat. 1 second. Yeah, and all these species, the ghadial, the Indian skimmer, otters, they all use these sand bars and large sandy banks and um, islands for nesting or for basking or for playing, etc. The Chitra indica, which is the narrow-headed soft-shell turtle, a very rare and endangered species of turtle, which some people have hypothesized that those very intricate patterns that you see on the carapace of the turtle are actually to mimic, potentially, to mimic the scattering of light after it has fallen on shallow sediment near depositional sandbars and so on. And this is a turtle that does not bask like other turtles do. It just sits in that shallow area, and probably it's like some sort of camouflage, which is really, incredible. Even small things like, when the moisture in the sandbar starts drying up, uh, there is a crust of silt that gets retained, because that thickens as the moisture dries. And this is a tern chick over here, which these chicks, because they are born from the eggs in the very hot summer, they seek shelter under those little, what can be called micro habitats of these crusts, which sort of shelter them by giving them just that much shade. So, again, some very interesting sediment dynamics at a very fine scale. Turtles, of course, use these collapsed, bars or small spits to bask on. These species lay their eggs in the sediment that the river has carried and deposited, and inside these, pits that they dig to lay their eggs, they secure the eggs from major, changes in ambient temperature in the air, basically. So because these reptiles have temperature determined sex at the embryonic stage of the hatchlings, the sediment actually provides an insulation or a cover for that process to happen as as maybe most efficient. This is an otter den, an abandoned otter den, and you can see that the roof of the den is actually maintained by sediment, but supported by roots that have, so it's mature enough. This bar or this sediment deposit is mature enough for some vegetation to have grown, which has secured a roof for the otter family that might have lived here before we found this abandoned den. And there are other housing complexes again carved because of sediment, like for the sand martins on the banks of the Ganga. So yeah, there is sediment is so critical, and as these pictures might have illustrated, really important for the survival of all these species and biodiversity in these rivers. Not to mention fish, which can't be shown in photographs, but lots of fish actually depend on cues provided by sediment fluxes through the river. People often say that जैसे ही पानी का रंग बदलता है ये मछली ऊपर आने लगता है, that's a very, what it means is that as soon as the color of the water changes, a certain fish rises up in the column and becomes more easy to catch. So even those kinds of seasonal fluctuations are determined by all these processes. Yeah, can I just keep this image here
Yeah, yeah.
as we
You
speak?
can
Yeah,
keep the presentation open.
thank you.
That was really fascinating, Nachi. I think as someone who has a blind cat, I really appreciate the navigating ability of the dolphins, and it's actually such an incredible evolution that they've gone through because of the habitat and really determined by the habitat. I think something that we don't always think of. When we look at animals. And just very interesting what you said also about these sort of small scale dynamics and micro habitats that we see, as well as much larger, I think, implications that sediment has had over time to the river itself. And maybe if you can touch a little bit upon how sediment has maybe shaped the ecosystem that you look at, not just in terms of the species you see there and the way they live, but also what the river looks like, uh, because it's a fairly unique and amazing river system.
Right. So essentially, all rivers carry sediment, and broadly we can understand. So if we speak of the Gangetic Plains, for instance, we know that many of these rivers are, at least the northern tributaries, including the main Ganga River, are Himalayan in their origin or trans-Himalayan in some cases, and that is why, as you know, this is geological times. It's a history that can only be appreciated truly on a geological time scale, unlike the animal histories which we appreciate more on the population generation time scale. So that is important to appreciate. And when the Himalayan mountains started forming, when the Indian plate, continental plate, collided with the Eurasian plate, which was nearly a process that began around 50 million years ago. And the sediment that was then raised up was being worked on by these rivers. Worked on is a way to again express. It doesn't mean that the river is actively doing anything, but with precipitation, with water falling on the land, water finds a way to flow by gravity, and in the process, it dislodges sediment. It thins down sediment. It chops it down to finer and finer pieces as its power grows, as it keeps acquiring more energy as it flows down. And this is in the headwaters where, because of the gradient, what we say is that the river there is, what is simply understood as a supply limited river, which means it has a lot of energy in its flow, but it doesn't have probably as much sediment as it can dislodge with that energy. And it does dislodge whatever it can, and it keeps carrying it down. And as the river flows down and it keeps aggregating, it keeps adding that sediment in its flow. And as it reaches a lower and lower gradient, it becomes more and more energy limited, which means the gradient itself does not allow it to carry anymore until it deposits that sediment. And this is not very complex. This simple, it's easy to understand with some simple physical laws, right? That a water body carrying that much sand will deposit it when the gradient is low, right? So that is how. And to understand this, we really have to understand what those depositions mean, because they create land. They also, depending on how the river is flowing or what is done to the river, if it gets dammed or if there is a tectonic event, forget even human history timescales. If there is a tectonic event, like the Himalayan mountain chain being fairly young, is still witnessing a lot of tectonic activity. There's a whole field or subfield of tectonics which is called neotectonism, which looks at the quaternary period and the tectonism that's happening like very recent times, which also can change the course of a river. And what that means is the river will carve out new land. It will also take away some land in the process of these shifts and changes, and carry that whole sediment, or after all the deposition, erosion, if we had to make a balance sheet of how much it has overall deposited and eroded, and finally carried all that sediment down straight to the delta, then we can appreciate how important that whole work of the river is. To just give you a good sense of that, was a very nice study which showed that the sediment that flows through the Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna delta actually flows along the eastern Indian coastline almost till southern India, along the coastline. So, that is the volume of sediment that all these rivers carry together. And so some of that sediment contributes to productivity of the estuaries of the peninsular rivers on the eastern Indian coastline. So you can imagine how important what seems like, often floodplains are called deserts in many of our Indian languages. They are not. They are actually very. They need not be fertile in an agricultural sense always, because sediment is also not homogeneous. It's made of sand, silt, clay. There may be some pebble-like material depending on where you are along the gradient of the river and how it has sorted that sediment. So based on all these things, we different of particle sizes have different properties, different fertility in terms of their moisture retention. So all these things are intricately connected to human time scales, therefore, because we said histories and futures. These are how much moisture is going to remain in silt carried by a river within a season determines how people will decide to crop there, how fisher folk will decide to invest in terms of where they want to try and fish a particular species which runs along the sediment. So all those processes are connected. I'll just,
Yeah.
as we speak, go through these pictures.
Yeah.
I have a sweet tooth. And so when I look at these images, whether from the river or from satellites, these are like, the sediment is like chocolate cake. And I mean, those who share this passion for sweets here would appreciate it from such a picture. It's like you actually feel that, maybe I could have, if I were able to grab a slice of that, cut eroded bank that you see, and it's a delicious sighting, is what you could say. And this is again to explain so many habitats created, not just along the main river channel or from the sediments and sandbars, but also in the form of oxbow lakes, which get cut off. Again, what cuts it off is sediment. So, or side channels that form where there are different kinds of depositions. All these habitats support different communities or different assemblages of species of
Mm.
fish, or even different livelihoods. Who is going to do what? Typically, in these landscapes, people do multiple livelihoods. It's portfolio, and
Mm.
sediment often sets the template for what you could do in a particular time frame. So
Yeah.
that is something to really appreciate. This is again a picture that shows you have livestock seen here. It's a shot from a drone. You see these fishing traps placed out in the river. This is then there is some in the far distance, there is some initial cropping activity that has begun,
Mm.
and these cows I think they're cows, yeah, and buffaloes. So they have started using that to take to go to the water. They've they're using that area for whatever purpose. So this is how, of course, the same sediment gets also used for sand mining, for various other economic activities. Let us call it that for now.
Mm.
And that really that's a template, and that is where we come to the human timescales of how sediment may get extracted, or what it may
Mm.
allow or may not allow in terms of human reach to the river, as well as protection to species from people. So it's all happening with these larger processes.
Yeah.
Simply put, I'll just put this GIF image here, which will come to with your next question, or which will follow easily from what I just said. Is that what do people do when these kinds of changes happen
Mm.
on their ground, on the spatial scales that they understand?
Yeah.
And there are this is really so dynamic, and in the Gangetic Plains it's very dynamic. In some other rivers in the peninsular Indian region it's less dynamic, but it's still important of how meanders happen, or braided channels form, what it means in terms of, so if the river is dammed and if the river is not carrying that much sediment, then what does it mean for erosion downstream and people losing land, etc. So all of those things.
Yeah, so I love that primer on the role that sediment has played really in shaping the rivers today, and in turn then shaping what lives on it, and creating really, as you pointed out, quite a beautiful landscape. It as beautiful as it is important. And I think often we look at sandbanks and we maybe miss out on seeing the beauty of it. So I'm really glad you pointed it out, because we also maybe think of them as uniform. And like you said, there's so much, there's all these like micro habitats, differences in different parts of the
Yeah.
uh, sand, even in the type of sediment that is uh, in different areas. And we also think of it as inert or dead in many ways, but there's actually so much life on this river, like you pointed out. I would like to know a little bit more about what you touched upon briefly, but just about the people that live in this area and how they maybe have adapted to this ecosystem, which we can see is quite a dynamic space. And so how do people and communities along these rivers respond to this sort of dynamic system? How do, say, fisheries or any other river dependent livelihood connect to the river and maybe even to sediment?
Yeah. So life is in these kinds of large floodplain rivers, where sediment really shapes several things of, you can say, aspects of daily life or seasonal investments, which I briefly touched upon. In terms of adaptation, it's really, it is quite humbling to see how easy it is for people to just move. I think many of us as city folk are too sedentary, and either by design or by default, whatever it is. But rural life, especially in floodplains, is very mobile. Fisher folk are, although they may have a fixed settlement to go to at the end of the day or at the end of their fishing trip, they are always on the water. So there are communities at least used to be communities in the Indus, for instance, who entirely lived on boats. They did not have any land where they lived. Yeah, and I'm sure this must have been the case earlier in the rivers of the Indian subcontinent in other regions as well. All these things, what they imply is that movement is important. What some important sociological work has called an amphibious lifestyle. It's very eloquent, very lovely way of telling the same thing. But what it really means is that once a sediment plume starts forming or a deposit starts growing, what does that mean for the people living around? So we'll just continue to see some more images. And I think because that really defines what. So here we are seeing just the, I freeze this frame because there have been so many changes between 1989 and 2018 is when this map, what this map shows. But we are currently here in this image, we are only looking at land and water to broadly classify it into two things. But now, if you add an axis of time on this, not just in terms of those 2 years, but what happened in those 2 years. So, in 1989, this river was under a private fishing regime where one family was entitled to collect taxes from or collect rent, you can say, from the fisher folk that or the boat ferrying people that use the river in this stretch. In 1991, that was stopped, but a sanctuary for river dolphins came up here. And, and all this is happening as the river itself is moving. So, what are the boundaries? What are the spaces that people can claim rights to? Can those rights be settled? If you settle them, will you change them? And even when land revenue was a concern for colonial administrations in India, especially with the British Empire, they tried to create a very very messy and intricate system of laws governing the ownership or entitlement to what they called alluvian and diluvian. So it's basically, if you had to sum it up, it's like it's a hapless fight with sediment that defines all these historical turns. Alluvian means land that has been taken away and it's somewhere underwater today. Diluvian, oh, is that correct? No, alluvian means the land that has been thrown up by the river. See, I can't even define it, right? So uh, it's the land that is thrown up by the river at a particular time, and diluvian is the land that the river has taken away with it, which is maybe under the water. And we have seen in this region conflicts such as people saying that this was the patta of my land or the land tenure boundary, and how can you fish here? So you are trespassing. Whereas that is diluvian, so it's already under the water, but it's still their land as per a fixed land record. And what is causing this? This is being caused by the reverse play of sediment erosion and deposition, right? So, in that sense, these are very real conflicts on the ground for resources, for access, which where sediment is again the template over which these conflicts are. Similarly, when new islands form, it's almost always on a first come, first served sort of basis to begin agriculture there, typically with crops such as cucurbits, watermelons, cucumbers, muskmelons, whatever. So when these guys land up there, again, the way they can carry out these transactions is for that sediment and for that piece of land. Some do it by talking to each other, many do it by carrying a rifle there, and cordoning off that area by going there on horseback. And these are all again people from the same region, right? But
Yeah.
that is what creates differences. That is what creates groups trying to access the resources and therefore conflict. So
Yeah.
these are one way to look at it is these are struggles
Mm.
to adapt to what the river is giving you in terms of the gift of sediment
Yeah.
for farming or for fishing for that matter. This is, I don't know if you can see the title properly, but this
Yeah.
also is an illustration of what it means. So this is an article I had written for Native Picture, and so these people, the fishing communities near Bhagalpur, they have been waiting for years now for a particular meander to die.
Mm.
Because of the formation of that meander, because of the Shankarpur Diara forming and growing over time in its size, we have had all these fisher folk and their settlement only able to
Mm.
fish in the side channel. Otherwise, to access the main channel of the river, they have to go really far, which is not worthwhile in terms of cost and energy and effort. So they have been waiting for this meander to get cut off, not only for this reason, but because whenever such a side channel inlet forms, there are more powerful entities taking over and
Mm.
calling it their territory and extracting rent from these people. So in a way, they are hoping for, or even people, we know our friends there who place bets on whether the river will finally carve out this sediment this year, or in 5 years, or in 10 years. And I had basically written about that thing, that you are basically not just betting for the sake of it or to get some extra buck, but betting on your future.
Yeah.
And if the same threat continues, and if the river has not, if the meander has not gotten cut off, you're going to have to find something else to do. So again, it's a very deep interface between what sediment and water do with each other, and what how people make use of it and make all sorts of abuses from that opportunity.
Yeah.
So that is one. The other question is, we are people again who are bounded by maps, directions, and everyone is. There are just different ways in which we do that. The larger question is, can there be a map in such a system? Or can there be one map is a better question to answer.
Yeah.
So, for instance, we have almost every year we have to make a new map because the sediment has deposited elsewhere, habitats availability has changed because of those depositions and connected erosion.
Yeah.
And we need to account for that by making a new map every year. You can imagine in terms of economic stability or revenue forecasts, this is a fairly noisy and disordered system. And until we have better ideas to actually respect this dynamic,
Mm.
um, we will remain caged by the problems of linear or a linear futurology, or assuming stationarity
Yeah.
so all those things really come together here,
Yeah.
and sediment plays a pivotal role in
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that. I highly recommend people read Nachiket's writing if you haven't already. If this talk is not indication of it, he's a very eloquent writer as well. I really like some of what you said. I think we interact with it a lot when we do work as India Sandwatch as well. This general, I think, lack of imagination of what sediment really does in a river, and maybe it's just like mind-bogglingly large, which is why it's great that you showed those visuals of over time and space how sediment is really determining how the river changes. And I think maybe that lack of imagination has in many cases sort of resulted in a governance and management system that is very disconnected from the way these dynamics play out on the river. I think you described it or alluded to someone who describes it as a fight with sediment, which is an interesting way of thinking about it, because I think some of the adaptations you mentioned before are almost like working with sediment versus, how do we fight it? And I really liked what you'd said later then about how map making, how the science that you all do, etc., adapts to um, or works with dynamism versus being stuck in time. um and obviously a lot of these changes are happening over extremely long time scales, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about how this landscape has maybe changed in the more recent past, and if you have seen more accelerated time scales uh, of change in this landscape, what maybe is um, uh, causing this, and how does this maybe accelerated time scale of change impact species on the river or people, communities that depend on the river, or maybe even relationships between fish and dolphins and people? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a very interesting question, which also leads us to what is the future then of sediment itself, right? With when we look at things like sand mining or sediment trapped behind dam gates, what are we really looking at? And I'll come to that. I'll just see if I have a better picture to show. Okay, yeah. So I'll just start here. So one thing is that you talked about acceleration, and you also talked about adaptation to in the previous question about how have human communities and societies adapted to the resource of sediment. So this is an illustrative sort of a picture. This is where they are not beating anybody. They are actually sowing maize or corn seeds. And what they do is they carry these sticks, and when the sediment moisture is, or the silt moisture is just right, this is in October or November after the floodwaters have receded significantly, they have these coin-sized holes in the ground that they dig, which are not too deep. They're about this much deep, and they plant one seed in each of those holes. And then they just slightly cover it with whatever is around that. Now, there is no plowing in this kind of farming. This is mostly done with corn and wheat sometimes, but this is essentially now what people have called as zero tillage agriculture and called it climate smart and whatever. But this is really a practice that indicates adaptation. People have been doing this for ages. Now the question is, what happens when we have a very different system? Now I did not talk about flooding because I think people generally understand that flooding is both a reset of the ecosystem, but also a pain for people living in regions largely because of social inequalities by being differentially exposed to flooding. The embankments of the Kosi are a good example of that, where um, whether or your location relative to within the embankment or beyond the embankment is determined by really by what you have and who you are. Right? So it's an environmental justice sort of problem where you as a person or as a resource user of the same river are exposed to very different risks. Now, under climate change and under the present, so one feature of the climate change, for those who may not already know, is an accelerated water cycle globally, which means much more extreme rainfall, much more warming, much more precipitation, but net precipitation is still going down in many regions because of more warming, or excess groundwater extraction leads to greater recharge. So everything is accelerated that way. So if we break down a simple water cycle or a water budget in terms of recharge, runoff, evaporation, and transpiration, everything is more, and something then is changing with that balance. So this sort of acceleration has many important things. One thing is, now if you think of these guys who are plowing, or not plowing, they are actually making those little holes. If the waters don't recede in time, or if the temperatures are too high, and which is both of those things are happening in the Gangetic Plains, at least in some parts, that the flood waters linger on for too long, so probably you're going, and by the time they actually start going down so that this thing can be started, the temperatures become too cold, and probably it does not allow for the best use of that moisture in the sand, or it may keep seeds dormant. It has this is again things that we have heard here and there, but these are also predictions. What happens if temperatures are too high for a winter? How does that affect those yields? Things like that, all of those things. So on top of that, if you add the larger water infrastructure, the because of dams or because of barrages, what is happening to the available sediment itself downstream, or in a particular reference location like this one relative to the dam. One part of it is that dams are also facing problems because of this excess of sediment, because whatever calculations they may have had while planning are also being now challenged to their limits because of accelerated the acceleration in the water cycle at large, as a due to climate and related factors. So all of this means that we will have uh, if you think of it from strictly from a livelihoods perspective, too much sediment in some places, too little in others, and with costs for land security, safety, etc. All of that. Uh, Erosion. This is just to show a picture of erosion, even in terms of deposition. So, what
Mm,
if so a river, as much as it needs a flood, it also needs a lean season, because
mm,
that is when all these species invest. So we have seen human investments in their livelihood. Species invest in their future generations by nesting and whatever. So in such sandbars, if you had too much water in a dry season, which a dam cannot contain, and which it has to release it just to protect its own infrastructure, these sorts of islands are going to get uh, inundated, and which means the Indian skimmers that may be nesting on such a bank, or ghadials that may be using that for basking, may lose in a particular year, which is like this. So in the lean season also, we have sometimes too much water in the river, and therefore in correspondence, lower sediment availability for these species. So that is how all these things get connected. See, this is again a picture of the one of the barrages that we are familiar with, and you can see that you can see the river channel there, I guess, here somewhere. But you also see those big sediment plugs around all the gates. It's a real big issue, and
mm,
it has also impaired surface water irrigation infrastructure. A lot of times, canals that are supposed to be irrigating at a particular time cannot do that even close to design capacity because of
mm,
sediment and siltation. So, even many of our dams do not have engineering mechanisms like under sluices. Some dams do
mm,
have it, but many don't have under sluices to allow a certain volume of sediment to pass as they do those flushing operations twice every year.
mm,
Usually, barrages do that once or twice every year. Storage dams can't even do that often, because the storage is important rather than the gated mechanism of channelization, like barrages do have.
yeah.
So there are all these sorts of things, and what you're left with is almost nothing. No water. So often, we have these notions in mythology about the pralay, or a
Mm,
civilization that is drowning underwater, but it's actually going to drown under sediment.
mm,
And that is something. It's just a possibility which we should think about. Because that is how even land degradation or
mm,
desertification happens because of the same processes, and that is the sort of high variability, high uncertainty of extremes that we will have to rethink our current water management in, given the massive continental global threats of change from climate, particularly, that we all have to brace up for. And the person on the ground is really not going to be, the person digging those little pits is not be going to be able to brace for these changes. That is the sad reality.
yeah.
And whatever we are celebrating as climate smart adaptations, are there's not going to be the context or reason for those adaptations to continue. What does that leave people who are dependent on those lands with? Those are the questions we have to ask. Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
just going to put on the light here. I'm sorry. I'll just do,
that's fine.
yeah.
Yeah. So we can also move into my last question from our end. And so I encourage people who have questions, please put them in the chat box so we can ask Nachiket your questions after he's done. Um, so uh, Nachi, very, very interesting uh, conversation about adaptation. It's almost as if, when we do things like dam management or building dams, etc., we forget that we have to adapt to sediment, which is a really startling thing. And when we do, it's almost reactionary, reacting to damage, reacting to climate change, and then, like you said, bringing in adaptations that already existed, but are maybe now a little too late. Um, and like you said, often don't balance this idea of environmental justice and social justice, where often the people that need these adaptations the most, are the people that aren't able to do it, and hence end up displaced or losing livelihoods, etc., because uh, of the kind of environmental damage and the kind of pace at which a lot of this damage is
Yeah.
happening. And so people can't really always adapt to it. Um, Versus, say, the longer time scale and the adaptation that you talked about, which was so beautiful. Just to wrap up, maybe if you could talk a little bit more about what happens to species then, like species that live in this landscape that, like humans, have adapted over very large periods of time to this sort of landscape and the way it changes. And when you have these accelerated timescales, um, what happens to species? Are they able to adapt? Have you seen something like that, or have you seen the unfortunate counter of that?
Yeah, unfortunately, people still might have options. They may not be the most just or fair options, but they are options. Species don't have options. And a turtle, there is a species of turtle that lays its eggs in the water, and not on sediment, or not in a sand pit. Why? Because as the flood waters recede, the eggs just get exposed, and that exposure to air is thought to be, this is again hard to prove, right, such things, but uh, as those eggs get exposed to the water, the hatching process begins. So, now this is the kind of adaptation that is tuned into a very specific temporal change in recession of flood water. Where is this turtle? How is it? It can't, it just, no matter how much it would like to, it is not going to be, it's not going to get an offset or an alternative nesting option. Even if it gets it, it's going to fail. So species don't have options, um, unfortunately. And that is the reason why we really are looking at a very shrinking space. Sand mining, things like even dredging, when unplanned, all contribute to this. Now people often think of this as habitats increasing. I'll just show this because this is upstream of the Farakka barrage. Now one can say, oh, there is so much more sandbars, so habitat for otters might have increased. In the short term, it is likely, but it also has created other risks downstream. It might have created risks to the barrage that might have caused this also, in some sense. So this is one. We have not we are not leaving room for sediment either. So suppose some brave Ghadial said that, okay, let them mine one side, many people strongly believe that a full harmonious coexistence between species and people is possible. It's definitely a goal to aspire to, but often it is simply not possible. If so, again, coming back to the brave Ghadial, if it wishes to still find a little corner to lay 40, 50 eggs, while the 90% of such a sandbar is under farming or under mining of sand, even if it decides to do that, even that much space sometimes may not be left, with growing demands on the land, growing desperation. Also, a lot of such changes are because there is no real governance of this. And I'm not indicating that state governance is particularly sorry or bad. Even communities are fragmenting. And what we often like to, or would really wish were true, about communities being united and concerned, and at least concerned about principles of equitable governance, not necessarily equal distribution per se, because that again is a difficult one. But even equitable governance is not possible often because of livelihoods that have largely been left to be opportunistic and desperate. So desperate actions increase threats to species, like what we see here with all these furrows made for this otherwise what would have been an excellent habitat for many of the species. Sand is of course one thing. I'll just go to embankments. Now, this is something which is again very interesting. We have to protect land. This is the fight against sediment. We have to build them because we have to protect the land that lies there. But um, in the process, the river is eroding from the bottom. So it's creating other sorts of risk, which we don't particularly appreciate, perhaps. This has implications for the eroded sand from underneath these RCC sacks that you see, it getting deposited downstream. So one effect then carries on to an effect below. So somebody wanting to protect their land here, and rivers are always upstream downstream problems in, if you think of it as in terms of resource economics, all these factors may save that land, but make many people lose out elsewhere. And how do you put that together? What is the scheme which allows us to add or subtract these losses or benefits and costs, right? So that there is no good answer to that. At least I don't know of one. And again, there goes, this is the large embankment again on one of the rivers in the Gangetic Plains. And you see, farming has reached right up to here, on what you see on the left, on the bank here, where my cursor, I hope you can see it, but where it's pointing. And we want more bridges because there's connectivity. So all of these things add up, and then because sediment is piling, because bridges also are like sediment magnets, they will have sediment depositing there. The embankment will have more embankments will have to be constructed, then that will lead to sediment plugs downstream which will have to be dredged for navigation. And all these are important needs. I am not saying that we should not have any of these things, or this is just not done. I'm just saying that we are not thinking enough about, the collateral impacts of multiple, human needs on the sediment and water, which impacts may be very, very far reaching, which we just seem to, it's better to not account for it to retain our sanity, is how we are sort of dealing with it. If you don't see the problem, it doesn't exist. And we are really looking at that sort of cumulative impact. And what we stand to lose is this, this. And it's not for aesthetic. I know many respected economists and sociologists who say that biodiversity conservation is for aesthetic purposes. And I'm sorry, but I don't agree, because under those good looking sediments and species, there is a very deep connection with human future. So, that is something we really need to bring to the forefront. And as you said, which is a very important thing, even when we think of mitigation, like, ecological flows or something, which are all important, we often miss the sediment. So our accounting is imperfect. And there are better ways of accounting. Many people, many serious scientists are, into the process of finding better ways of doing it. And we hope that, that is where the, that constant effort has to continue from everybody. It's not just an effort to question, but also to come up with better ways of doing things, better ways of accounting for sediment in managing rivers or wetlands. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering that question, Nachi. It was, um, I mean, of course, an extremely sad um, thing to hear, that species don't have options, and it can feel, quite hopeless, I think. And so I think the work that you're doing and WCT is doing is extremely brave and important work. I think, like you said, if you don't see the problem, there's not really much action that can happen. Um, and I think it's so important then what you did just now of distilling these really often big, daunting challenges to explain maybe the complexity of these interactions, adaptations, our own dependence on sediment. And hopefully by like understanding this, complex but really very amazing system can maybe encourage and enable us to act to hold our governments accountable uh, to at least considering what is happening when we're making policies, etc. Um, And yeah, thank you so much. I would also really encourage people to follow the work that WCT is doing across India, and to learn more from that, and to also follow Veditum and India Sandwatch to learn even more about sediment. We also post regularly about sediment stories and future sessions, and we have some very exciting future sessions that will also be talking about the ecology and interlinking the interlinks between ecology and sediment in many river systems. So we have some exciting things coming up there, and again, like always, a great opportunity to learn more about this. But yeah, thank you so much, Achi. We will move
Thank
on to
you.
questions soon. I just wanted to check if there was anything else. I think we really enjoyed seeing a lot of those pictures and hearing a lot of the, very interesting, nuanced little stories that you have from the landscape. So if there is anything you'd like to share, please go ahead. We'd love to hear it. And I will also just ask you some of the questions that people asked.
Oh, okay. Thanks. So I'll just, I think I'll just share one thing, if again,
Mhm.
with your kind permission. Sorry, there are some extra slides which are not required, but I'll just share this small piece, very short, small poem. And,
Mhm.
people think that there is no, you can't locate a place. If, in such a dynamic system, even I indicated that there is no map. There are several maps, there are changing maps, but the
Mm.
sense of place is the same. And this is just something that I'll just keep it here while I take questions.
Okay. Yeah. Love that. Okay. So we'll start maybe with the first question that came in. Sid had asked why is there a difference in dynamism between Himalayan and peninsular rivers?
Right. Just a second. I'm just going to move that zoom bar away. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, one reason is that the Himalayas, as I said, are a fairly young and
Mm-hmm.
evolving sedimentary formation, or a pile of sediment, a simple way to understand it, which is being constantly being worked on by all these things. It's also tectonically very active. And the volume of sediment, we are talking about the Himalaya. So the sheer volume of sediment itself is important, that all those rivers carry together. There are
Mm.
other, reasons for that dynamism. One important one is, as I said, tectonic activity, neotectonic in particular. Some of it is related to the age of the system in terms of
Mm-hmm.
it being younger than the peninsular Indian craton. The Western Ghats, for instance, are much older geologically than the Himalayas and the Gangetic Plains are. Importantly, the Gangetic Plains are like this plug of sediment that has been placed atop the original basement rock
Mm.
underneath it. So here we have a heap of sediment carried over thousands, lakhs of years, which is now being carved out by whatever channels are flowing. And that adds to the dynamism coupled with tectonic activity. So, in contrast, tectonic activity is lower in the peninsular Indian region. The
Mm.
geological features are much older, and there's not, there are no big rivers as a result of that, which itself means
Mm.
that the scope for dynamism is relatively less. It's not that those rivers are not dynamic. Also, we are talking about spatial dynamics here, but
Yeah.
temporally, all rivers are, they flood. Most rivers flood. So even now, so then that is a different kind of dynamics. We have often, therefore, you see the impacts of dams or sand mining felt much more strongly in peninsular rivers rather than
Mm.
Himalayan rivers. The reason being that the available sediment itself is limited. And if that
Mm.
gets mined out, the replenishment rates may be lower than for
Mm.
Himalayan origin rivers. So there are these sorts of differences which It's not a great
Yeah.
answer. There are other reasons like the flexure of the Indian plate and all, but let's not get into too many technical details for this talk. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that you're cursed with knowing so much that you think your answers are inadequate, but that was a great response. The next question is from Abhilash, who asked, how would you find the age of a sandbar?
Okay, interesting. So there are quite a few ways. One is to use remote sensing, and simple ways to find out when, but again, that is constrained by the time zone in which satellite images are even available. Like after 1970s is when you have something to look at that. Before that, you can't. You have to rely on maps, and which may not be accurate. So you have to rely on topo sheets or better maps. But the simple way to think of it is, if you overlay two satellite images, and if you're not seeing a bar that in a previous image and you're seeing one now, you can then at least find a minimum age that, okay, in these 2 years this bar might have formed. And the next part of it is, how long has the bar stayed, on account of either river processes of erosion and deposition, or
Mm,
on account of human extraction, or scarring of the sandbar by sand mine
yeah.
skimming or sand mining or whatever. So that is one. But there are other ways. So sometimes people can age sediment also based on the isotope ratios and stuff. I don't know enough about that. But based on the age of relative ages of the sediment, sometimes based on the sorting of the sediment in
Mm,
smaller rivers, at least, you can tell that, okay, this deposit must be so much old.
mm,
Sometimes you can see, like people always point to human features. They say pani ka level idhar tak tha, that kind of thing. And
mm,
often there is not a very straightforward linear relationship, but there are mathematical relationships between the height of the flood and the height of a sandbar that it might have left behind as the water receded. So that
mm,
those kinds of things can actually be worked out, and that gives us some idea of whether that same sandbar just got overlaid by water and water passed, leaving the sandbar there. How much did it add to the sandbar? All these things can actually be done.
mm,
So let me see if that picture is there. That is a great picture which may help. Yeah. So here are, don't look at the people on the left, but this person here on the right is actually taking pictures of a pit he has dug and trying to locate what may be newly aggregated sediment in that pit versus the older sediment from past year. So these are, sedimentology is a beautiful science in that sense. And many such questions can be answered with fairly sophisticated techniques.
thank you. Our next question is from Aarti, who had very nice things to say about the talk, including saying that it was riveting, as always, Nachiket.
Thank you.
And Aarti asks, how have sediments changed in terms of fertility? And she's given some context for the question because of what she'd seen in Assam. There have been big changes in the sediment or sand carried by rivers due to upstream river rock and boulder mining. The sand now carried by the rivers has increased, and when the Himalayan rivers reach the plains, they dump the inert, heavier sand on the floodplains. And she asks, are we seeing such changes in the Ganga, and how does that affect both livelihoods and biodiversity?
Yeah. So I can't really give a very quantitative insight into that because I don't know. But it is, at least from observations in the field, that seems to be happening. There's much more sand instead of topsoil or silt or other components of sediment that contribute to fertility of the
Mm,
soil. This is a process again, as I was alluding to, accelerated by both large scale climatic factors as well as by local extraction of topsoil. in particular. And this is really something worth checking out in terms of it can be a good research question to answer at scale. In some areas, I'm sure that this is happening, at least in the areas I am familiar with. Uh, if you sort of take out the stabilized banks by embankment, because there, there is a lot of human addition also to in the interest of agricultural intensification. If we look at these open habitats, we do see sand and only sand at times. We rarely, or rather, we can feel that nothing is possible here much. But then there are people then move on to sand adapted crops, which also need some shading and making little furrows like all these cucurbits. So yeah, that's a very bad answer, I know, but I feel that it is the similar processes may be occurring elsewhere also. We should, I think, refer to more studied reports about this phenomenon, like the land, aridification, desertification, or general degradation sort of, studies from the IPCC, which has looked into more regional literature, and from more regional studies, which are quite robust in at least some river basins of the country. Yeah.
We have one last question from Rahul Singh, who asked, what will be the impact of the construction on the riverfront from Bhagalpur to Munger? I think you can, maybe if
Okay.
you are familiar with it, you can answer specifically, or maybe tell us something more general.
Impact, yes. I mean, that is definitely a major, modification of the banks in that area. And more than the impacts of that riverfront, I would also say impacts on the riverfront, because depending on how that river stretch is going to move or be dynamic, we will have impacts to the riverfront itself. So, it's both ways, and impacts of the riverfront will be aplenty. One of them will be not just on sediment, but one of them will surely be in terms of a lot more garbage going into the river. And I think I mean, if there are good mechanisms thought of, that is welcome, but usually that never happens. So it's something to be seen. It's something to be seen with open eyes and engagement, because it's still coming up. But I'm more worried about the impacts on this fancy river rather than off the riverfront on something.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nachi. I know we've gone a little over time, but I honestly, personally did not feel the time at all. I think it really flowed extremely well, much like a river. But we do have to wrap up now. And just to reiterate what I said earlier, I highly recommend that people learn more about Nachi's work, check out his writing. We did share some resources initially when we'd sent out the emails in response to registration, but you should also definitely check out the Wildlife Conservation Trust via their website and their social media. Please also check out Veditum and especially the India Sandwatch platform, which is a really great way for you to learn more about sediment and sediment extraction, and also maybe to contribute in some ways um, to the sort of accountability that we're trying to introduce into the system. Um, yeah, so check out our website. Please also follow us on social media. I think someone will be putting links into the chat so that you can find those easily. And for our next few sessions of Sediment Stories, again, like I said, we have some very interesting speakers coming in. I won't spoil any surprises yet, but please, follow our social media, where we always post upcoming sessions, and we will also be announcing them in our newsletter shortly. So yeah, please do that. If anyone would like to sign up for the newsletter, you can also just put your name into the chat and we will sign you up. Yeah, thank you,
Right. Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Yeah.